They mocked her stance. No unit patch, no ID, just a battered rifle and that strange, tilted grip. She looks like a cosplay sniper, someone laughed. Until the instructor froze. He stared at the serpent symbol near her trigger, eyes wide. Then he whispered, "She's one of them." The laughter died instantly, and what followed left the entire range in stunned silence. Welcome to the Story Scape, where forgotten heroes finally get their voice. Before we begin, let us know which city you're watching from, and if you believe this story deserves to be remembered, hit that subscribe button and help us keep their memory alive. The first time anyone noticed her, it wasn't because of her rifle. It wasn't because of her presence or her stance or the way she moved with quiet precision. It was because someone decided she didn't look like she belonged. It was day one of the Joint Marksmanship Evaluation Program, hosted deep within a wind-swept base tucked into Arizona's high desert, a place where military branches sent their sharpest to sharpen even further, and where the occasional civilian expert was allowed to observe or train, usually at the invitation of someone with serious connections. She didn't arrive in a government van or private escort. She walked in alone, wearing a plain gray hoodie, black cargo pants, and scuffed-up boots that looked like they'd survived more than a few years in unforgiving terrain. No one recognized her. No one even spoke to her, not until she crossed into the range boundary without saying a word. That's when Corporal Jansen, one of the more vocal Army shooters, barked. "Hey, you lost, ma'am? Civilians don't wander into this zone without a badge." She said nothing, just held up a laminated access card. Clearance level, special temporary, signed by someone whose name was partially redacted. That made them laugh harder. Jansen turned to the others, waving his hand. "She probably won some contest or something. Civilian Appreciation Week." But what really set things off was the rifle. It wasn't standard issue. It wasn't flashy either. It looked old, used, customized in strange ways. It had a shortened barrel with a hand-cut suppressor, a non-military scope mounted slightly off-center, and grips that had been rewrapped in what looked like faded parachute cord. And there, right above the trigger guard, was that symbol.
A serpent, coiled in a figure eight, almost invisible unless you were really looking. Sergeant Hill, a recently transferred Marine instructor, furrowed his brow when he caught a glimpse of it. But before he could say anything, the teasing resumed. "Ma'am," Jansen said mockingly, "you planning to hit paper with that dinosaur or just pose for Instagram?" She stepped to the firing line, still silent, still calm. Took position in the prone, but not the way the manual taught it. Her shoulder placement was lower, her hips angled unnaturally. Even the way she breathed, slow, deep, rhythmic, felt wrong. "Hey guys," one recruit said, smirking. "She's doing yoga or something. Maybe she thinks this is sniper Pilates." They laughed again, but not everyone did. From the elevated control booth, Colonel Raiden Holden adjusted the lens on his spotting scope. He'd seen thousands of shooters in his career. He could tell the difference between a weekend warrior, a textbook performer, and someone who knew how to make a rifle do more than just fire. And something about her stance, the deliberate micro-movements of her fingertips, the exact placement of her support elbow, all of it triggered a memory he couldn't quite access. Then she fired. The shot cracked through the desert air. No celebration, no reaction. She chambered another round, adjusted slightly, fired again. Two more, Then one last shot, faster than the others. Sergeant Hill walked down range with a clipboard to mark scores. He stopped cold. The pattern wasn't a miss, it was a message. 4 shots surrounded the bullseye like a box. The 5th shot hit dead center. Back at the line, the woman stood up, slung her rifle over her shoulder, and walked away without a word. Colonel Holden didn't blink. His voice, calm but firm, came through the loudspeakers. All units, stand by. We're modifying today's schedule. Someone finally asked, "Sir, who is she?" Holden didn't answer. He just stepped away from the scope and whispered to himself, "She's not here to learn. She's here to remind us what we forgot." The briefing room buzzed with aftershock energy. She hadn't said a word since that first demonstration, and yet the silence surrounding her now felt louder than anything anyone could remember. Not because she demanded it, but because no one quite knew what to say. It wasn't just the 5-shot group she placed on target Alpha.
It was the pattern, a training signature, a code, one known only to a handful of elite units, units that had been erased from official rosters more than a decade ago. The kind of units that operated in deep black, where deniability was built into their DNA. At the back of the room, Colonel Holden reviewed the shot data again. Grouping, 1.2 inches, winds, 11 knots, cross angle, elevation, fluctuating due to thermal lift. There was no reason she should have hit center mass, let alone in that sequence, but she had, and she'd done it while being mocked by half the squad. He pulled up an archived PDF from a restricted drive, the old Ghost Shot catalog from Operation Orion back in 2013. Same shot signature, same box and core formation, same weapon customizations. The serpentine mark confirmed it. She was connected to them. And if that was true, she shouldn't be here. Not publicly, not under a civilian alias, because ghosts don't come back unless someone calls them. Meanwhile, Sergeant Hill finally spoke up in the barracks. "I don't know who trained her, but that stance, I've seen it once before. Northern Helmand, Afghanistan. We lost a recon unit. Never got their bodies back. But one night, the enemy compound exploded from 3 different directions, all headshots, all Viper pattern." Private Diaz overheard. "Viper? You mean that sniper unit they talk about in whispers? I thought they were a myth." "Yeah," he said quietly. "So did I." The next day, things got colder. Not weather-wise, the Arizona sun didn't relent, but the energy had shifted. They watched her, closely. No one laughed anymore. Even Jansen, the self-proclaimed alpha of the squad, kept his distance. She didn't engage. During PT, she ran alone. During lunch, she sat by herself, quietly assembling a scope that none of them recognized. At night, she was the last to leave the range, reviewing her shot log with a kind of clinical detachment that didn't feel like obsession, it felt like muscle memory. On the 3rd morning, a secure message hit Holden's encrypted tablet. Sender, unknown. Subject, ghost tag, confirmed. Body. The serpent mark is a kill tracker for VZ-class operators. If it's authentic and her grouping checks out, she's legacy. Be advised, VZ-class were terminated officially in 2016. Survivors presumed deceased or reabsorbed into parallel contracts. Do not engage unless authorization granted. Holden stared at the message. Legacy. He hadn't heard that term in years. Legacy operators weren't just trained, they were imprinted. They didn't just remember how to fight, they were the fight. But why would one resurface now? In a mixed-branch, semi-civilian marksmanship program, no less. And why wasn't she flagged when her application came in? Back on the field, she was setting up for long-range practicals. The instructors had added wind-simulating fans, heat plates, and flash barriers to simulate field conditions. Most shooters took multiple tries just to hit the outer circle. She made a single correction on her scope, then fired. 10 rounds, all landed within a 1.5-inch radius, a perfect spiral pattern. Holden's voice cracked over the comms. "Stand down, range cold." Everyone looked around. Then they looked at her. And for the first time since she arrived, she spoke, not to anyone specific, but loud enough for all of them to hear. Precision isn't something you learn. It's something you never forget. The squad looked stunned, but one voice finally broke through. Corporal Elena Rivas, one of the few who hadn't mocked her. "Ma'am," she asked quietly, "what unit did you serve with?" The woman paused, just long enough, then said, "I didn't, not officially." That answer was the loudest confirmation she could have given. By the following afternoon, rumors had mutated into doctrine. The recruits still didn't know her name, but they were already calling her something else. Ghost Viper. VZ0. The one who disappeared. And while the instructors didn't publicly validate it, they didn't shut it down either. Even Brooks, who'd barked at her positioning earlier in the week, had gone quiet. His voice, once sharp with condescension, now carried a note of careful distance, like he'd realized he wasn't the highest authority in the room anymore, just the loudest. But Holden couldn't let it go. He watched her every movement from the tower, not with suspicion anymore, but with curiosity and a growing sense of obligation. She was someone who didn't ask for attention. She hadn't said anything about her past. She wasn't seeking recognition, which meant, in his world, she likely deserved it the most. He contacted an old contact, Langston, former JSOC intelligence asset turned low-profile security advisor.
Someone who used to specialize in recovering lost assets. Holden spoke quickly, carefully. "I've got someone in my unit. Civilian paperwork, no history, but she shoots like someone who was trained by a program that never existed. Possibly VZ." Langston went quiet on the line. For a moment, Holden thought the signal dropped. Then came the reply. "Describe the stance." "Modified prone, right elbow flared out, muzzle canted 12 degrees off axis, deep breath calibration between shots." Langston exhaled audibly. "She's not just trained, she's original pattern. That's how Viper Zero shot during blackout missions. You sure she's not someone we lost?" "She's here, she's real, and she's rewriting the range." Langston didn't respond immediately. When he did, it was with one sentence. "If she's still alive, it means she never stopped fighting." That night, Holden requested a private session with her. No rank, no protocol, just two people with questions neither could ask publicly. She agreed, silently, and met him at the edge of the firing range where shadows stretched long across the dirt. The place smelled like oil, brass, and sweat. He offered her coffee. She declined. "So you've become somewhat of a mystery." She didn't react. "I've trained with elite shooters, but your pattern, your grouping, it's too familiar. You're not a civilian, not really." She stared out at the horizon. "I never said I was." "Then why are you here?" "For the same reason anyone shows up to a place like this, to remember something or forget something else." Holden understood more than she realized. "You were part of Viper, weren't you?" She didn't answer,
but he continued anyway. I served as Overwatch during Black Star 2012. We had backup from an unknown unit, never confirmed, never briefed, but they saved our asses from 1,400 meters through a sandstorm. She turned her head slightly, almost imperceptibly. There were 3 of us then. Only 2 made it out. Is that why you're here? I'm here, she said, because I still owe someone a shot that mattered. Holden fell silent. Sometimes the most brutal wars weren't waged on battlefields. They were internal, played out in memory, regret, and promises never fulfilled. And that's what haunted him about her.
She wasn't chasing glory. She wasn't hunting redemption. She was chasing balance, closure, the final dot on a sentence no one else knew she was writing. The next morning, something shifted. She arrived early, not to train, but to teach. She stood beside Corporal Rivas and adjusted her grip mid-draw, corrected her stance, repositioned her trigger finger, not with arrogance, but with surgical precision. Others began to gather, at first cautiously, then eagerly. She broke down angles, explained recoil dampening through breath control, demonstrated wind compensation without high-tech gear. Bullets are dumb. It's your body that has to be smart. Someone asked about her gear setup. She opened her case and laid out her M4. Custom-cut scope, reduced trigger tension, counterweight balance near the magwell, and the serpent, scratched faintly near the trigger. "What's that mark?" a younger recruit asked. She looked down at it for a moment, running her thumb over the etching. "Nothing important, just a reminder." Rivas leaned in. Of what? Of that not every shot is meant to hit. Some are meant to warn. Some are meant to save. And some are meant to be remembered. As dusk settled in that evening, Holden made one final call. "Langston, she's not hiding anymore." "What's she doing?" "Something rare," he said. "She's passing it on." Langston exhaled slowly. Then maybe there's still hope for the next generation. The transformation wasn't instant, but it was undeniable. Within days, the training range felt different. The atmosphere, once filled with sarcasm and noise, was now taut with reverence. The recruits spoke less, listened more. Even Brooks, still barking orders, had begun referring to her only as instructor during live fire sessions, avoiding eye contact as if unsure of his own authority anymore. Something about her presence had shifted the gravitational pull of the entire compound. She never asked for respect, but now no one dared withhold it. Her sessions had become unofficial rituals. Soldiers who once rolled their eyes were now arriving early, sitting cross-legged in the dust, notebooks in hand, trying to decode the angles and breathing rhythms that had once been dismissed as Hollywood nonsense. "Why do you always fire in threes?" someone asked.
She gave the smallest smile. Because 1 shot means warning, 2 means fear, 3 is a promise. They wrote that down, every word. But what they couldn't write down, what couldn't be taught in diagrams, was what she radiated between the moments. It wasn't just technique, it was presence, a kind of silence that didn't shrink, it expanded. A silence earned through missions that never made it to headlines. A silence sharpened by decisions that broke hearts and saved lives, sometimes both in the same moment. Late one night, Holden found her at the edge of the observation tower. No rifle, no recruits, just her and the wind. He approached carefully. "They're starting to believe in ghosts," he said. She looked out at the darkness, expression unreadable. "They believe in results, not ghosts." Holden nodded. "Still, you've become something else to them." "I didn't come here to become anything." "Then why did you come?" She took a long breath and for the first time answered without defense. "I came to see if I still had a pulse." He said nothing. "Do you know what happens after you serve in silence? After the missions end and the unit is erased from every system? You vanish." "No," she said. "You echo in ways that don't let you sleep, in faces of civilians who look at you like you're broken, in checkout lines, at crosswalks. You echo until there's nothing left but reflexes." He looked at her, unsure of what to say. "I taught myself to become invisible, but I didn't realize I was also disappearing." Holden's voice dropped. "You've done more than enough, Kurlinda." "No," she said. "I've done what needed to be done. There's a difference." 2 days later, everything shifted again. A black SUV pulled up to the edge of the range. No markings, no plates. 2 men stepped out, both in civilian clothes, but carrying the unmistakable cadence of people who hadn't laughed in years. She saw them before anyone else, paused, then calmly set down her rifle and began walking toward them. The recruits watched in silence. One of the men extended an envelope. She took it without opening it. Holden stood frozen at the edge of the line, watching this quiet exchange unfold. Then one of the men turned to him. "Are you Colonel Holden?" "Yes." He handed over a sealed document. "You've been granted temporary clearance for background verification."
You'll find your instincts were correct. Holden opened the envelope later that evening. Inside were fragments, redacted files, metadata strings with more black bars than text. But one phrase stood out, unredacted and bold. Operator, Viper 0. Status, disavowed, not deceased. Clearance, level Omega, eyes only. That night, the recruits gathered in the mess hall, not for a meal, but a decision. Someone had printed off a still from the range video, a moment where she adjusted Revis's scope mid-instruction. Beneath the photo, they had written a single phrase in marker. "We don't need her name. We've seen what she is." They pinned it to the wall above the exit, the last thing every recruit would see before stepping out to train. Revis stood beside it, tears in her eyes. "She showed me how to shoot, but she taught me something else too." "What?" "That precision isn't just about where you aim, it's about why you aim." Word spread. Veterans began arriving, not for ceremonies, but quietly, alone, in old trucks. They came just to stand by the range. Some left tokens in the sand, dog tags, folded flags, spent casings. No one needed to say anything. They recognized the style, the rhythm. They'd seen it once, when someone saved their unit and vanished into smoke. And they'd heard the whispers. Viper 0. The ghost who never missed. The shadow who never asked for thanks. Now, for the first time, the shadow had a shape. 3 days later, before dawn, something unexpected happened. A Humvee rolled in from the eastern ridge, not part of any scheduled exercise. Soldiers emerged from their bunks, boots half-laced, watching as the vehicle came to a stop near the old perimeter wall. Out stepped an older man in full uniform. Not a general, not a politician, but his posture spoke of both. He walked with a limp, subtle but permanent. His chest bore only a single row of ribbons, yet the soldiers near him stood straighter the moment they saw the patch on his left shoulder. It was old, faded, a silver serpent biting its own tail. The mark of a unit that officially never existed. She was already waiting for him near the firing line. She didn't salute him. He didn't expect her to. "Ma'am," he said softly, his voice sandpapered by decades of command. "We need to talk." Holden arrived seconds later, eyes scanning the insignia, his mind racing.
"You're Admiral Reeves." "Retired," the man said. "Officially." "And unofficially?" Holden asked. Reeves glanced at him, then at her. "I'm the last man alive who can confirm her real record." The woman didn't speak. "She saved me once. Bagram, 2010. I was pinned, night extraction, no support. 2 shots from an impossible angle, cleared the path." Holden froze. "You were the VIP they wouldn't name." Reeves nodded. "She was there. I never saw her face, but the shot grouping, the pattern." He looked down at the target she had just obliterated. "I've only seen it once since, today." He turned back to her. "And I came here to say, I'm sorry." She finally spoke. "For what?" "For what they did to you after you saved us, after you saved so many of us." "They didn't do anything to me," she replied, her voice flat. "They just forgot I was ever there." "That's worse," he said quietly. The recruits were still watching from a distance. Whispers rippled. "Is that an admiral? What's going on? Why's she speaking with him like that?" Reeves looked back at the small crowd gathering. "She told me not to come, said this wasn't about recognition." Holden nodded. "It's not, but it is about correction." Reeves walked to the center of the firing line, cleared his throat. "My name is David Reeves. I've served this country for 40 years. I've commanded entire fleets, and I've buried more soldiers than I can count." He pointed toward her. "But that woman right there, she's a better soldier than I ever was." Silence. "She operated in the shadows so we could live in the light. She was erased so we could be remembered." He turned to her again. "I don't care what name you're using now. I came here to say the one I remember." She blinked once, and then in front of everyone, the Admiral saluted her. Perfect form, and slowly every recruit followed, one by one, without orders, without hesitation, salutes rising like a tide. She didn't cry, she didn't smile, but her fingers trembled slightly as she returned the salute. Holden stepped forward. "You once said silence was a shield." She nodded. "Well, today it became an echo, and now everyone here hears it." That night, a letter was pinned on the barracks door. No signature, no explanation. It read, "To the next ghost, if you ever feel forgotten, remember, legends don't vanish. They train the ones who will." The recruits didn't know who left it, but they memorized every word. The next morning, her bunk was empty. No note, no noise, just the unmistakable silence of someone who had never truly unpacked because they were never meant to stay. At the edge of her bed sat her vest, folded with precise military care, and resting atop it a single shell casing, polished to a shine, stamped with just 3 digits, 394. Master Sergeant Brooks found it first. He stood frozen. No commands barked, no scolding, just the quiet weight of knowing he'd dismissed someone who could have written the manual he was teaching from. The instructor's vault received an unmarked case that morning. Inside, her weapon, still perfectly cleaned and battle-worn. On it, a handwritten label, "For the next one they laugh at." The rifle wasn't logged in inventory. It wasn't categorized as training equipment. Instead, it sat in a glass case marked simply legacy. New recruits passed it every day. Some glanced and moved on. Others paused, sensing something in the display they couldn't quite explain. Torres, a 19-year-old with no military family and shaky hands, stared at it for minutes on her first day. "What's this?" she whispered. Instructor Martinez, now promoted and far more measured than when he arrived, stood beside her. "That?" he smiled faintly. "That's proof that sometimes legends show up in civilian clothes." 3 weeks later, a video surfaced online. Footage of her impossible grouping, of Holden's stunned expression, of the way she walked away without needing validation. The internet did what it always does, tried to trace, to guess, to explain. But veterans knew, and they stayed silent. Instead, the comments section filled with strange messages. "I saw that stance once. Syria, 2014. She pulled my unit out of a nightmare in Nigeria. Never got her name, but those shots, you don't forget." A legend was reborn, not as a hero with medals, but as a whisper in the wind. At the range, late one evening, Holden walked past her former firing position. There was no one there, but in the dirt, fresh tracks. A single casing, recently fired. Perfect spacing, perfect angle. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He just whispered, "Still watching, aren't you?" And somewhere beyond the hills, the wind answered.